Hey everybody, welcome back to Book Breakdown. My name is Tyler Riemenschneider. I'm a self-published author. Today we're going to be going over the second book that I published today. As you might have noticed, today I'm wearing a Superman shirt, which is appropriate because today we're going to be talking all about superheroes. But the S doesn't stand for Superman today. Today it stands for Sidekicks. My second book, The Sidekicks, is all about, as you can guess, a group of sidekicks who come together. They work on a problem that is too big for local authorities but too small for superheroes to worry about. I'm a pretty big nerd. I love all the Marvel TV shows and movies that come out. So I knew right off the bat when I started writing that I was going to want to tell a story about superheroes. So this is something that's sort of like right up my wheelhouse. So we'll go ahead and get into it. One of the things right off the bat that kind of stands out about a book is the cover. Um, each one of my books I feel like has something special with the cover going. The first one is one that I actually created the image myself. It was pretty simple because it's just, a mountain range. So I figured, oh, I can do that. This one is the logo that the sidekicks use. I had a friend named Ben Barnes who worked on it. So it's dark blue like their suit is. And then you might notice that like the S is kind of painted on there. That's because like each sidekick puts it on themselves. Because it's not exactly a perfect image. It's sort of unique and it stands out a little bit just like each of the characters. So right off the bat, I feel like, it's a perfect image for the story. So yeah, already getting into it. So yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll start to dive into the story. So pretty much with any book, you can't just go off of a premise. You have to have like some sort of idea for the story. So you can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do superheroes. No, you have to think of an angle to go with. So for me, I try to figure out a good story, and I figured that a lot of stories tell about like super powerful heroes and all that. So I wanted to do something that was kind of unexpected. So I figured we could tell a story about the sidekicks. Because I like characters that kind of feel like they're on the outside because of like some sort of reason or another. They feel different, but then those differences are what sort of like helps them save the day in the end. So that's kind of what I was going for with the sidekicks. Like if you have a group of them, they aren't going to be super overpowered, which is something that sometimes you kind of deal with superhero stories. It's like, oh well, if you have a Superman character, why can't they just solve the problem instantly? So sidekicks are a little bit on the weaker side sometimes, so it kind of like balances things out. They all have special abilities that help them, but they aren't like super overpowered. So the story starts off with a bunch of sidekicks. They know each other because they're actually in this support group for sidekicks. Because in the world of superheroes, people kind of look down on sidekicks. Who would want to be a sidekick when you could be a superhero? So they all get together and they talk about their issues because they can't talk about it in their day to day lives because they have secret identities and things like that. So they come together to this group and they're able to talk about like how they feel underappreciated or how like they do a lot of hard work but it doesn't get noticed and stuff like that. So that's how all the sidekicks meet each other. The main character, Radar, he has super senses and it allows him to detect things around him like a radar. So that's something that helps him in a fight, but he isn't able to get hero status on his own. So he ends up having to work for a superhero who really just doesn't appreciate anything that he does. He would prefer that like his sidekick just stays on the sidelines while he goes off and saves the day. So he keeps going to these meetings, and then he realizes that there's kind of an issue going on in the city. He comes across these people who seem to be feeling somewhat ill because they're just kind of like, standing around. They aren't really aware of what's going on around them. Their skin is green. And then he also discovers that they actually have enhanced strength. So they're ill and they're super dangerous. Which at first, this is something that like the police don't know how to handle with it, so they just lock these people away. When they tell the superheroes about this, they're kind of just like, oh, well, this is just a couple people. It's not the end of the world. But Radar kind of sees this as a threat. He's like, if a whole bunch of people break out like this, that could cause a real problem. So he wants to take the matter into his own hands, even though nobody else seems to be paying attention to it. So this is something that sort of like kicks off the story, and then he realizes that like he can't do this on his own, so he wants to put together a group of other sidekicks to kind of prove their worth and then hopefully solve this case for them, so that way they can hopefully reach hero status by the end of it. So that's the basic plot of the story. Now that we kind of went over that, we can go ahead and talk about like some of the characters in there because there are quite a few like interesting characters with their superhero names and their powers and all that. So yeah, we'll go ahead and jump into that. So with this book, I feel like there's some pretty unique character relationships and things like that. In the first book, the whole team comes together and they realize that they need to work together to survive. So they also have a goal in mind. So there's sort of a sense of like they have to work together. This one is sort of different because like they're mounting this investigation, but they aren't entirely sure about how to go about things and all of that, or if there even is an actual threat that they're looking into and stuff like that. So they sort of clash personalities and things like that. So it's very much like a dysfunctional family. But I think the characters are pretty interesting. A lot of them are based off of people that I actually know in real life, so it makes it a little more personal for me. For me, it's more just like an Easter egg or something like that. It's like, oh, I threw your name out there, but they aren't direct representations of the people or anything like that. But I've already told them who they are and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and get into the actual characters themselves. The main character I already talked about. His name's Radar. He's able to use his senses to detect things around him, and he's the one who's like, hey, we should try to put a team together to solve this problem. When he does this, he ends up going to one of the other sidekicks in the support group. His name is Kickback. He's probably the closest thing to like a cool sidekick in this world. He's basically like the equivalent of Robin, where he uses his martial arts and skills to help him fight crime, but he doesn't actually have any powers of his own. When the story starts, he's actually retired from being a sidekick because he had gotten injured in the line of duty. So he pretty much just goes to the support group to hear from other sidekicks and talk about like stories from like his glory days and things like that. But when Radar tells him about this issue, he's willing to get back into the game and all of that. So he's a pretty interesting character. Another one who's pretty important to the team is probably Gadget Gal. She is the daughter of an Iron Man type of superhero. He has a suit of armor. He uses his intellect to fight crime and things like that. But he realizes how dangerous the superhero world is, so he doesn't want his daughter actually flying around in a suit of armor or anything like that. But he does support her, so he funds her research and he allows her to create gadgets and things like that to help her fight crime in her own way. So she normally goes about using like grappling hooks and rocket boots and things like that to help her get around the city and everything. So she actually funds a lot of what the team does and things like that. They use one of her labs as their sort of base of operations. So she's pretty important to help them mount this investigation. Another character that they recruit is named Bookworm. I thought that would be kind of a funny name for like a sidekick where it's like, oh, he's just off reading a book, like he's not like in the line of fire or anything like that. He is all about intellect. He has super intelligence. He's also able to recognize patterns and things like that. So he isn't necessarily much of a fighter, but he does help them in their investigation. So he is pretty important to the team. He's pretty much becomes like their guy in a chair where he's telling them like what to do, where to go, things like that, which I feel like most teams kind of need somebody like that. So he kind of fills in the role for that. So they have these members to help them sort of like mount their investigation so they can try to figure out what the problem is. And then they also need a few fighters to help them along the way. So one of the fighters that they have is a character named Boomer, but she actually changed her name to Flashbang when she joins the team. She had gotten into an incident where her powers misfired because she struggles with anxiety and stuff like that. So that's why, like, when she joins the team, she ends up changing her name because they don't want to associate it with the bad press or anything like that. She's able to fire concussive blasts from her hands and things like that. So they realize, like, with her having anxiety, it could pose a threat to the team. But if they're going up against a whole bunch of these infected people, then it is important to have people that can dish out a lot of like damage and things like that. So they realize that like it's worth the risk having her onto the team. She actually becomes kind of a key member. Like by the end of it, I think that like they probably wouldn't even be able to succeed without her. So it is kind of a calculated risk bringing her on board, but she definitely like gains confidence over time and sort of like steps into her own. So I think she has a pretty interesting character arc. Another character that they have is a character called the Charger. I thought that was kind of a funny name because it's like, oh, you're charging into battle, but then it also sounds like a phone charger, so it's one of those things where it has like a dual meaning to it. But she actually has the ability to electrify her hands. So she's basically like a walking taser, which is a useful power, like I said, but at the same time, it's not like super overpowered. So with her abilities, she actually has hero status, but she often teams with another superhero named the Lightning Lord, and he basically has like all of the electrical powers. He's able to fire lightning. He can use magnetic abilities. He's able to fly around. So when the people see them together, she kind of seems like his sidekick. So that's why like she goes to the meetings and all that. She kind of tells them how like her brother looks up to the Lightning Lord, but not her. So she's another character who is like in it because she wants to prove that like even though she already has hero status, that like she deserves it. So I think that it's kind of interesting that like she's not even a sidekick, but like she still fits into the group pretty well. And then the last member of the team, his name is Hotshot. He is pretty powerful. Like he's able to shoot fireballs out of his mouth. So that's something like, you picture a hero would do. But his problem is his attitude. He's so cocky and arrogant all the time. He thinks that he's better than everybody. So that's why like the hero board determined that like he can't have hero status. So he basically is a sidekick in name, and they pair him up with somebody who can kind of keep an eye on him. But he just wants to prove that like he is, capable of being a hero. But like a lot of the times he, puts himself first, which ends up being a problem. So he hopes that by joining this team, he can prove that like he has what it takes, and that he doesn't need to be like kind of babysat or anything like that. So he is kind of a loose cannon, but again, he's one of the members that like helps them when they have to deal with like fights and things like that. He's a little reckless, but like they all end up having to come together if they want to succeed in the end. So they have some pretty good, relationships with one another, and yeah, I think that sort of like helps to drive the story forward. Um, and even during the part where it's like they aren't fighting all the time, they're just investigating. The way that they go about it uh, sort of continues the story. So I think that it works out pretty well for them. So now that we've talked a little bit about the story and the characters involved and all of that, I wanted to talk a little bit just about like superheroes in general, why I chose to write this story. Um, I love all the Marvel movies and stuff like that come out. I know some people are like, "Oh, there's Marvel fatigue and all that." For me, I think people are just like tired of okay superhero movies, but I don't think they're tired of superhero movies. You want a story that's like really great, something that is worth telling. So I think people just want more of those kind of stories. So I don't buy into the whole like superhero fatigue or anything like that. But I do think that superheroes are able to tell like really interesting stories, especially like nowadays with the way things are and all that. We see injustice all the time. We see the little guy getting picked on. Nobody's able to stand up for them or anything like that. But that's not the case in the world of superheroes. In the world of superheroes, the little guy gets bitten by a spider and suddenly he has powers. You see, heroes who are willing to stand up against injustice and do what's right, which is something that we want to see in our daily lives and all that. You see heroes that like stand by their beliefs and have like certain moralities. Some people might think of that as a weakness, but in the world of superheroes, it makes you worthy in the end. It becomes a strength. So that's something that, I think tells a compelling story. Like I know some people might just be like, "Oh, superheroes, that's kind of basic." It's like, well, no, there's a lot more behind the meaning and all of that. So I think that that's something that I tried to capture in this, and I tried to pay homage to some of the stories that inspired me and things like that. Like the main character Radar, when he goes into his side or into his hideout, the passcode that he enters to get into it is actually Stanley's birthday. So that's me kind of like paying respect to stories that came before me, and uh, giving them the recognition that I hope that they deserve. So yeah, I really love superhero stories. So I hope that the Sidekicks was able to capture what I love about those stories. So yeah, if you guys want to check it out, it's available on Amazon. I'd really appreciate it. I hope that you found this video interesting. If you like it, please check out my books. If you've read them, leave a review. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.